The People of Sparks, sequel to The City of Ember, written by Jeanne DuPrau. Chapter 8. The Roamer and the Bike. Several days passed. Poppy would get a little better, and then a little worse, and Lena and Mrs. Murdo stayed with her nearly all the time, putting cool rags on her forehead and trying to get her to drink the medicine the doctor gave her. When Mrs. Murdo wasn't caring for Poppy, she was prowling around the medicine room, inspecting the doctor's jumbled collection of herbs and potions and powders, making notes in a tiny notebook, and rearranging things, trying to create some order. Dr. Hester was often gone, seeing patients in the village, and when she was in the house she was doing 10 things at once, or trying to, and being interrupted by patients who came to the door at all hours. It seemed to Lena that the people of Sparks were constantly cutting themselves, spraining their muscles, getting rashes, and falling ill. The doctor would give them medicine or bandage their wounds, and a few days later the patients would bring something in return. A basket of eggs, a jar of pickles, a bag of clean rags. Lena had never seen anyone so disorganized as the doctor. She peeked into the medicine room once when the doctor was out, and was amazed at the clutter in there. Shelves and cupboards and tables, piled with stuff in bottles and stuff in boxes and stuff in jars, all higgledy-piggledy. How Dr. Hester found anything she couldn't imagine. It took the doctor a couple of days to even get organized enough to figure out how Lena could help her. But when she did, she began giving her one chore after another, and sometimes several all at once, often forgetting that Lena didn't know how to do them. "Could you go and water the asparagus?" she'd say. Then before Lena could ask what asparagus was and where to find it and what to put the water in, she'd say, "And can you rip some of those rags in the kitchen basket into strips for bandages? And when you've done that, maybe you could wipe the floor in the medicine room? I spilled something the other day, I think over by the window. And the chickens, they need to be fed." And then she'd be out the door, leaving Lena to remember the string of tasks and how to figure out how to do them. Everything here seemed extremely inconvenient to Lena. To get water, you had to go outside the gate to a pump and work a stiff handle up and down. To go to the bathroom, you had to go out in the back of the house to a smelly little shed. There was no light at night except for candles, and at first she thought there was no stove to cook on. "Oh yes," said the doctor, "that's the stove there." She'd point to a thing like a black iron barrel in the corner of the kitchen. "But I hardly ever use it in the summer. Too much trouble to keep the fire going, and it's too hot anyway. We mainly eat cold food in the summer." When she did want to cook something, boil a pot of water for an egg for instance, or make tea, the doctor had to squat down, stuff some dry grass and twigs into the stove's belly, and set them alight. Sometimes she used a match. Sometimes she hit what looked like 2 rocks together until they made a spark and the grass caught fire. Then she had to feed in bigger and bigger twigs until the fire was finally hot enough. This fire seemed fairly safe to Lena, though she didn't like to get too close to it. At least it was contained in its iron box. It wasn't free to leap out at her like the fire in the fireplace. Fortunately, the doctor didn't make another fire in the fireplace after that first night. As the days grew hotter and hotter, the nights were no longer cold. Extra warmth was the last thing that they needed. One day, a week or so after Lena first came to the doctor's house, a patient came with news to tell as well as a wound to bind. She was a scrawny young woman with brownish teeth. She had a bad scratch on her wrist where she'd scraped it against some rusty wire. "There's a roamer in the village," she said. "Just arrived this morning." "What's a roamer?" Lena asked. The doctor, tying a rag around her patient's wrist, said, "Roamers go out to the empty lands and bring things back." "From the old places," added the patient, "the ruined places." "My brother Casper is a roamer," said Torin, "and when I'm old enough, I'm going to be a roamer too. We're going to be partners." This was the first time Lena had sensed real happiness in Torin. His little eyes shone with hope. "That will be exciting," Lena said. "Is it dangerous to be a roamer?" "Oh yes. Sometimes you run into other roamers trying to get the same things you want. Sometimes you're attacked by bandits. You have to fight them off. Casper has a whip." "A whip?" "A great long cord, as long as this room almost. If people get in his way, he lashes them." He lifted his arm overhead and brought it down as if he were lashing something. "Whoosh, whoosh," he said. "Now stop that," said the doctor absently, tying the final knot in the rag. The patient left, and Lena and the doctor and Torrin, along with Mrs. Murdo carrying Poppy, went down to the market plaza to see the roamer. A crowd had assembled in the plaza. Lena looked for Doone, but she didn't see him. She saw only a few Emberites, in fact. Most of them must have been working in other places. But a great many villagers were there, clustered around a big truck. The truck was loaded with barrels and crates, and on it stood a brown-skinned woman with wiry muscles in her arms and legs. "I have been far in the north," she cried out in a shrill, strong voice. "Out in remote corners of the empty lands. I have traveled roads where I saw no human being for weeks on end. And in these distant regions I came across houses and farms that had never been searched. I have treasures for you today." She beckoned with a long brown arm. "Step up and look." The crowd pressed forward. Apparently this roamer was known to the villagers. Some people called out greetings and questions. "Did you bring us any writing paper this time, Mackie? What about seeds? What about tools? And matches? And clothes? I'm so tired of wearing homemade patchwork." "I have all that and more," the woman called. "Come close, special things first." She bent over an open crate and rummaged around for a moment. When she stood up again, she was holding a blackened iron cooking pot so big she had used both hands to lift it. "What am I offered?" she cried. "Half a bushel of dried apricots? A bushel of peas? Barrel of cornmeal?" The woman listened, cocking her head, her eyebrows raised. She waited until the offer stopped, and then she pointed at a tall young woman with shiny black hair who had offered 5 loaves of apricot cornbread. "Done," she said, and she lowered the pot into the young woman's hands. For the next thing, the roamer reached into a big cardboard box. She brought up a smaller box colored blue and held it high. "Soap flakes," she cried. 24 boxes of them." Dozens of people bid for these. They were all gone in minutes. Then came more cooking pans, 2 thick jackets of shiny material, rolls of rope, garden tools, books, a pair of scissors, some doorknobs, some nails. There were a few odd, useless things, too. For a half a dozen carrots, one woman bought a pair of faucets, one with an H and one with a C. "What will you do with those?" asked Lena. People here got their water from long-handled pumps that stood at certain spots in the village. No one had indoor running water. "I'll turn them upside down," said the woman. "They'll make good candle holders." When the roamer brought out a handful of jewels, Lena gasped. She had never seen such things, necklaces and bracelets made of gleaming stones and silver chains. But only a few people seemed interested in them, and they bid hardly anything. One girl bid a couple of potatoes, but a man got them for a slightly used pair of sandals. "If my wife doesn't want them," he said, "I'll use them to pretty up my oxen." The roamer brought out the last of her wares, packets of paper, boxes of safety pins, some spoons and forks. The doctor stepped up to buy a small set of glass bottles. "Dr. Hester," the roamer said, "good to see you." "And you, Mackie," said the doctor. "It's been a long time." "I was hoping you'd be here," the roamer went on. "I ran into your nephew the other day." "Casper?" cried Torrin in a voice so piercing that several people looked up startled. "Where is he?" "He was up in the apple country," said Mackie. "I told him I was coming down here, and he said to tell you he's heading for home." "Is that right?" said the doctor. She was clearly not as excited as Torrin. "We haven't seen him for quite a while." 1 year, 10 months, and 19 days, said Torrin. "When will he be here? Did he say?" "Should be soon," said the roamer. She was putting the little bottles into a cloth bag. "I'd guess within the next 2 weeks or so." When the roamer's sale was over, Lena walked home along the river road with the doctor and Mrs. Murdo and Poppy, who was asleep in Mrs. Murdo's arms. Torrin leapt ahead, his thin legs splaying out sideways. He bounced off steps, jumped onto walls, leapt up to grab branches of trees and swung from them. As they neared the doctor's house, Torrin, who was way ahead of them by now, suddenly turned around and raced back. "You have to get out of our room," he said to Lena and Mrs. Murdo. "My brother will want his own room, and he'll want to be with me. You all have to move." "Fine," said Lena, "we will. We'll go live with our people as soon as Poppy's well enough." Torrin's narrow face lit up. "Good, good, good," he cried. "When are you leaving?" "Not today," said Lena. Not right this minute. But soon, Torrin cried. He skipped ahead of them again, through the gate and across the courtyard. The doctor said not to mind Torrin. He was being rude because he was so excited. But it seemed to Lena that Dr. Hester didn't see clearly when it came to Torrin. He wasn't rude just when he was excited. He was rude nearly all the time. The doctor was so preoccupied with her work that she hardly noticed him. Maybe if she'd pay him more attention, Lena thought, he wouldn't be so awful. But he was awful, and Lena would be glad to get away from him. 2 weeks, she thought. Then we'll meet Caspar the Great, and if Poppy is well by then, Torrin can have his room back and we'll go and live with Dune and the others. Now and then, Lena saw people on wheels going by on the road in front of the doctor's house. The only wheeled vehicles Lena had ever seen were the heavy wooden carts and Ember. But these people were riding beautiful slender devices, 2 big wheels per person. They glided by, their feet going round and round. She wanted to do it too. So badly she wanted to. What are they? She asked the doctor. Bikes, of course, said the doctor. You've never seen one? No, said Lena, looking at a bike with longing. If she could have a bike, she thought, she could go even faster than when she ran. She could go so fast and so far. She looked out toward the endless rolling hills. She could go everywhere. She could go to wherever the roads ended. I wish I could ride one, she said. Well, you can if you want, said the doctor. There's an old one out behind the tool shed. I suppose it still works. There is? Lena nearly dropped the basket of eggs she had just gathered. May I get it now? I guess so, said the doctor. But would you mind watering the parsley first? And if you could just shell these peas and maybe wash that spinach? Lena did these tasks in a fever of impatience, and when she was finished, she dashed out to the shed. The bike was leaning against the shed wall. It was old but beautiful, made of wires and slender pipes and rods, some of them silver under their coat of dust, and some of them red. Thin, weedy vines wove among the spokes of the bike's wheels, and cobwebs draped its seat. Lena took hold of the 2 handles and pulled the bike from its nest. She wheeled it out onto the road in front of the house and brushed the cobwebs and dry leaves and bits of grass off it. And then she swung one leg over and settled herself on the seat. Now what? She spent the rest of the morning figuring it out. She pushed in the pedals, rolled forward, tipped over sideways, and had to put her feet down. She rolled forward again, but didn't know how to turn. She fell off. She heaved the bike upright and tried again. She fell off again. After an hour or so of this, she gave up and went inside for a while. And later, when she tried again, something had changed. She had the feel of it in her legs now, or somewhere in her. She rolled forward. She put a foot on the pedal and pushed. She rolled farther. She brought up the other foot, and magically her body understood for a second what to do. She was sailing. Her feet were going round and round. A smile broke over her face. She held on, feet going round, breathless, breeze against her face, a whole long distance, maybe 5 yards, before suddenly she was nervous and dragged her feet along the ground to stop. She stood holding the handlebars, her mouth open in amazement. By the end of the day, she had it. She could ride back and forth on the road. She could stop wherever she wanted to. She could even turn around corners without putting a foot down. I'm going to see Dune, she told Mrs. Murdo. She was longing to see Dune, longing to talk to someone she really knew. Mrs. Murdo was fine, of course, but she was a grown-up. Lena wanted to be with a friend. She got on the bike and rode, sweeping down the river road, into the plaza, where she asked someone for directions, and out the other side of town to the hotel. When she got there, she stopped for a moment just to stare. The enormous old building looked to her like a wonderful place to live. She felt a sudden longing to have her own room there, back among her old friends and neighbors. It was nearly evening by then. People were sitting on the hotel steps in the last rays of the setting sun, eating their dinners from their food parcels and talking. Some were down by the river, cooling their feet, splashing water onto their faces. Over by the farthest wing of the hotel, a few boys were gathered around another boy, who was sitting on a fallen tree talking to them. Maybe Dune was over there. She wheeled her bike toward them. The ground here was too rough and weedy to ride on. Her old friends and neighbors called out to her as she passed, and she waved at them, glad to be back among people she knew. When she got closer to the group of boys, she saw that June was among them. He and a couple others were listening to that tall, dark-haired boy. What was his name? Tim. He'd been a cart puller in Ember, she thought. He laughed as she came up, a ringing, confident laugh, and all the other boys laughed too. She went up behind Dune and tapped him on the shoulder. He turned around. She grinned at him. "Look, Dune," she said, "I have a bike." He seemed astonished to see her. "Oh," he said, "Lena, come and talk to me," she said. His eyes shifted back toward the tall boy. "Okay," he said, but he didn't move. "Come on," said Lena, tugging at his jacket. They walked down toward the river. Lena leaned the bike against a tree, and she and Dune sat facing each other on the ground. "What a huge place," she said, waving an arm at the Pioneer Hotel, and talking fast in her eagerness. "What's it like? Will you show me around? Poppy is a little better, and maybe in a couple of weeks we can come and live here too, with you, and with everyone." Dune nodded. "That would be good," he said. "It's kind of lonely at the doctor's house," Lena went on. "There's a boy there who doesn't like us, and the doctor is so busy she can hardly think, and her house is a mess, and I have to do a million chores." She paused for breath. "Today we saw a roamer, Dune." "A roamer?" Lena explained what a roamer was. Dune listened, but she saw his eyes veer back toward the group of boys. "Who is that boy?" she asked. "The one who's talking." "Chick Hassler," said Dune. Lena turned around and looked at him. He was handsome, she thought. His black hair was thick and glossy. His face was all sharp edges, as if it had been carved from wood. "Is he a friend of yours?" "Sort of," said Dune. "I'm just getting to know him." "Oh," said Lena. "Do you know which room Lizzie is in?" Dune said he didn't. "I don't stay inside very much," he said. "It's kind of dark and dismal in there. What I like is being outside." He pointed up into the branches of the tree where the little fluttery things were hopping around. "Remember when we first saw those?" he said. "When we just come up from Ember? I learned that they're called birds. When you start really looking at them, you see there's all different kinds. I've seen ones with a yellow chest, and ones with stripes on their wings, and ones with red heads. There's even one that's bright blue." He gazed upward. "It's strange, isn't it? Why have all these different kinds, I wonder? Just for fun of it?" A burst of laughter came from the group of boys around Chick Hassler. Dune glanced over at them. "Do you like it here, Dune?" Lena said. "In the village of Sparks, I mean." "I do," said Dune. "I like it a lot." "Me too," said Lena. "Mostly." "But it sort of worries me that we have to leave in 6 months," Dune said. "There's so much we need to learn." "Well, I guess so," said Lena. "But maybe if we leave, I still wish—" "Wish what?" said Dune as she trailed off. "Oh, I don't know." She'd been going to say she wished they found the city she used to dream of, but she was afraid Dune might think that was silly. The sun was going down. Shadows grew longer. "Show me your room before I have to go," Lena said, "so I'll know where to find you." Tick was walking away, and the other boys were following him. Dune gazed after them. "I can't right now," he said. "I will next time you come." "All right," Lena said. She got up from the ground and swatted the leaves off her pants. She picked up her bike. "I'll see you sometime," she said, and she rode back to the doctor's house, feeling lonelier than she had before.